well, let's get started. Today with us is Paul Smeets, an expert when it comes to charities, restoring nature, and everything that surrounds our mission. We'll be talking today about the mission we have with Sumthing and the 7 key insights underpinning it. But before we dive in, Paul, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. So my name is Paul Smeets, and I'm a professor of philanthropy and sustainable finance at the University of Amsterdam. And my personal mission is to make the Netherlands the most impactful country.
Wow, that's a very inspiring mission. Great.
And it fits your mission. So
it does.
That's why
Yeah,
we're here.
exactly, exactly. Our mission as Sumthing is to accelerate nature restoration worldwide. And we want to achieve that by making donating to restoration accessible, engaging, and meaningful. And I think there's a lot to unpack there. So perhaps let's start with the first one, accessible. If you look from your perspective at the world of philanthropy and giving to nature, what do you think about the accessibility as it currently stands?
Yeah, I see 2 things that are important there. Number one is that it's primarily the old generations that give and not the young. And what I see with your platform is that that is really a chance, in my opinion, to get the young people back.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That they also donate, because they are much more visible online and not so much via the traditional channels, which is the second point. And that a lot of the donations are still coming in from door-to-door fundraising or from fundraising in the street. And I think that the Sumthing platform is just a new way that can attract new types of donors.
Great. Yeah, yeah, I totally see that. Like we also have this mission, like if we can be in the places where people are aware of their their impact on nature. So whether it's buying something online or making a payment or booking a travel, then we can really provide a meaningful moment that people can contribute. Yeah. Right on. Okay, then the second one, so engaging. For us, that really means visualizing progress and the results that these projects have. Can you share from your perspective, do you think that's important or not? Like, what is your thoughts on that?
So here I just look at what science tells us. That's my role as a scientist. And then I do see there that it's very important for donors to see tangibly what is happening to their money.
Yeah.
So what donors don't like is if they donate and the money just goes into a big pot and then, well, you don't know what is happening. So the more you can make it very tangible, then the more likely are donors to donate again to such a charity in the future.
Yeah. Cool. And that's, well, we can dive in later as well with the insights, but why do you think that is the case? That still at the moment, most of the donations work like that, where you don't really get to see the results. Do you have any thoughts on why that is in the current status?
It's quite difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, you must know that when you're building now the platform, particularly a lot of charities have many projects, and if for all of these projects you need to show your donors exactly what happens with the money, that's tough, and that costs a lot of money. Until recently, they also didn't have good technology to make that happen.
Yeah, yeah. Brilliant. Okay, and then the last one is about making it meaningful, ensuring that the money that comes in actually makes a difference, and obviously that is visual, but then also that it has the most kind of effective result out there. Any thoughts on how we could best achieve that?
Yeah, so first of all, that's crucial, right? The impact is ultimately what we should care about. And well, there are many different ways, and we can talk about that for a whole hour.
Yeah.
So one of the key things when it comes to restoring nature is that you really have this additionality component. So you add something that somebody else hasn't already done. And there is where a lot of problems have been in the past, where, for example, you had some CO2 offsetting certificates, but they were just sold 3 times.
Yeah.
And then it looks like you contribute something, but actually it was already being done. And if we can have a technology that really verifies and says, no, this is really a new tree that is planted, or this is a new piece of land that is protected, you name it, that can also really be beneficial for the trust that a donor has, because they are sure now that they are really adding something new.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that puts our mission into context. So thanks for that. I think what I'd like to do next is briefly kind of recap. You know, when we started all the way, like day one of this adventure, the first thing that we did was to look at like the supply side of this platform, right? There's demand, that's businesses and individuals that want to make a difference, and then there's supply, the projects that are actually doing the work.
Yeah.
And our strategy was, let's start with the supply, because if they don't want to work with us, then we can stop. And what turned out is that actually these projects are quite open to work in a more transparent way and make the fruits of their labor tangible. So we were super happy with that. And from it, we learned 7 kind of insights that we got as we were engaging these sort of world-class restoration projects.
Yeah.
And I'd like to just step through those insights one by one, and then again get your perspective on, how does that fit in the broader context of charity and nature restoration. So let's dive in. So, number 1 for us was this idea: build it once, build it well. What we noticed is that a few projects were kind of already dabbling in building let's call it a transparency infrastructure, where they have a technology where they can share the results. And our idea was, well, let's kind of centralize that. Let's build it once with a team that is well versed in technology, so that we typically say we do what we do best in the cloud, so that they can do what they do best on the ground. And ideally, even this would make their work more effective, because they can focus on the things that they do best, which is ecological and social impact. So that's our thinking behind this. Any thoughts from you on that? Like, do you think there is a reason for our platform to be, and that all these projects can come together on it?
Yeah, so I generally see that charities can cooperate much more, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make sense that every charity would build their own technology to measure their impact, and it also doesn't make sense if all the charities verify the same things all the time.
Yeah.
So I think I'm an economist. From an economic perspective, you want to scale this, and you just want to have one or several platforms. So there could be more. Your platform focuses on nature, but for many other problems, think about healthcare.
Yeah.
There I could also think about, hey, does a kid really get a vaccination? It's the same problem. I want to make sure that it's an actual new vaccination, and not the same vaccination is being presented as 3 times, just like with the CO2 offsetting. So I definitely see that charities can benefit from having more centralized ways to measure whether what they promise really is delivered also, and showing that to the donor.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I think that lines up exactly with what we're trying to do. And important to mention that most of the projects on the platform are indeed charities, but some are also not. We sometimes also engage with sort of commercial companies or even steward-owned companies like ourselves. Any thought on that? Like sort of I see this blurring line between like, you want to make an impact and you can do that as a charity or you can even do that as a commercial company as long as you have that sort of overarching
what
goal.
do the companies do that are on your platform?
Yeah, well, in the different categories that we have, whether it's cleaning up plastic or bringing back coral, there are sometimes also commercial companies involved. And we don't think that's a problem because we say, well, if you are really good at making impact, we have this thing called the Sumthing score, right, where we look at a few dimensions, and this is one of them. So then perhaps these projects score slightly less on the accountability and governance side of things, because there we prefer to work with charities. Yeah. But when it comes to their effectiveness and their methodology, they might actually perform really, really well. So that's, there we have this mix, and we try to be transparent about that, what kind of organization you're dealing with. Yeah. Just curious to see how what you think about this line with like non-profit / for impact and how that's changing over time.
Yeah, I see it as a continuum where on the one hand we have pure for-profit companies and on the other hand we have pure charity.
Yeah.
And then are many forms in between, like impact investing is another nice example that has a combination of both a financial component and an impact component.
Yeah.
In my view, we also need all these parties, right? If we really want to have a change, we cannot say, oh, we do everything with charity, because there's simply so much potential that you leave besides that the companies, for example, have, but clearly companies alone also cannot solve the problem. So we need combination, and what I think is crucial, like you mentioned, that you are transparent, that people know, okay, this is the for-profit component, and that they can judge for themselves whether they think that's a problem or not, and it depends, right? We have seen problems with commercial companies in the microfinance space, for example, where the initial idea was when Mohammed Yunus won the Nobel Prize for Peace in 2006 that microfinance would really help the poor. But then with everything good, there is an opportunity for bad guys to come in and just rip off poor people. And that's what you saw in that industry. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that we should throw the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
So, of course, everywhere where you can do good, some people can come in and do bad things. There I see a role for Sumthing also to ensure donors that you are working with the good guys.
The next idea is, okay, get everything in one place. So make sure that these parties, commercial and non-commercial, are in one platform. And because of that, we can then start to bring in technology that would otherwise be out of reach of these individual projects, right? So one example is satellite data and satellite analysis, right? We can use footage of satellites to check how restoration work is actually, what impact it has, right? So in the case of forests, for example, we can monitor forest growth over time, even going back in time. Another example is AI, right, where we use AI to verify all of these results and make them visible. Those are some things that would perhaps otherwise stay out of reach of these projects. And then the third dimension of this is where, because we bring everything together in one place, all of a sudden it gets more interesting to integrate it into other third-party channels. Right? Because there is a broad offer, because there is volume and scale, then all of a sudden you can talk to these larger parties, say, hey, why not integrate donations into your checkout, for example? That's a bit our thinking behind this. And perhaps again, from like an economist perspective, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that new technology like data analytics, AI, they provide so many opportunities. At the University of Amsterdam, we have a center for my colleagues called Analytics for a Better World.
Yeah.
And all they do is really using technology to help charities, NGOs, to have more impact. And also in my teaching, as of this year, I will teach students about AI, about data analytics. Well, not me, my colleagues in my course, because I do believe that it's really going to be fantastic opportunities. I already see what they did now. For example, so my colleague Dick den Hertog in the United Nations Food Program, they managed to deliver 40% more food for every euro just by optimizing the whole chain of how the food is delivered with AI.
Yeah.
And that's crazy, right? If you think about it, that you, for every euro, you have 40% more food being delivered. Yeah, and in the same way for nature, I think once we have a really good idea of where the bottlenecks are and how every project can add to that, and we can verify that, we can also increase the effectiveness probably by a similar number. You get more idea where it's working, where it's not working, and that's crucial. And I think also there it's important that we explain this to donors. It's also fine if a project doesn't work, right? If from the beginning you have a good business plan, say, for your project, even for a charity, I would call it a business plan.
Yeah.
When we look at startup companies, 90% fails.
Yeah.
Only 10% makes it. And why would I expect this to be different in the charity space? Will probably be the same. And donors should also be patient and give charities that room to experiment and to openly share if something doesn't work, because then the whole sector will be better. Right?
And this comes back to your earlier point, right? Where, we can, if they are all in the same place, they can learn from each other. They can find out what the best practices are and quickly scale those up.
Yeah, and hopefully share all the data that they generate, right? Because in the end, like I said before, if everybody does this individually, it's just incredibly inefficient.
Cool. Okay, then on to the next insight. So all of this technology, right, costs money to run it, to maintain it, and even to improve it over time. And so that needs to come from somewhere. Someone needs to pay for it. We quite quickly decided that it shouldn't be the projects paying for it. So we said our mission is to accelerate restoration. We are going to achieve that by getting more donations towards these projects that are moving the needle. And so we don't want to take money away from them, which is why our business model is like the donator, typically a business or even an individual, pays an additional fee to us, the Sumthing fee, and the rest of the money goes to the project. So it's out of every €6, €1 goes to us and €5 goes to the project. And that's how we run the show and keep the lights on. What is your thought on that model?
Yeah. First of all, that you are very transparent about it, which is often not so much the case.
Yeah.
And I think this is really important. Again, for the trust, right? In the end, donations, it's all about trust. Right? Why do people give money away without receiving anything in return? Because they trust that the charity will do something good with their money. And being transparent helps to contribute to that trust. And I think another aspect is that very often I see, again, looking at the academic literature, that donors don't like overhead costs because they always feel like, oh, this is money that you are wasting. But it's not. Because every company, also commercial companies, have overhead.
Yeah.
Like if you have a well-running business, you have office buildings, but you also have the technology. And I actually think that investing upfront in good technology, you will earn that back many times later down the road.
Yeah.
And that's crucial. And I think once you manage to explain this to donors, and they see, okay, yeah, it is €1, but it's €1 of my 6 that is very well spent, because I personally can see what happens with my money, and charities are going to use these satellite images to improve what they are doing. And charities also haven't tried to explain the overhead costs. And if you don't explain, then people fill this in themselves and they think, oh, yeah, it might be that the CEO just buys a new football table for their office.
Yeah.
That's the idea that people have overhead costs. But of course it's not.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, indeed. And we try to be at least sort of upfront about it, and we've kind of locked the amount of overhead that we can have, right? We can never change it in that sense. That fee is sort of fixed, and then we're seeing as well, because we engage with businesses a lot, like for businesses this makes sense because we essentially provide a service to them where they can just make impact on the go. We've looked at all of the things on the platform. We facilitate that they can engage their customers or their employees with the impact that they're making. So then, they typically understand where that comes from, and they know the concept of overhead all too well.
Without overhead, nothing happens. So I look at the Against Malaria Foundation's one of the world's most effective charities already for years.
Yeah.
They provide malaria bed nets to individuals. These bed nets are also transported via trucks, right? And these trucks are overhead costs. But how else will you have the bed nets being delivered to the villages?
Yeah. I mentioned earlier, like we want to kind of make it accessible, make it very easy for businesses and individuals to kind of contribute. So we select projects at the gate, right? We look at what I mentioned, the Sumthing score with these 5 dimensions, and then we try to curate an offer of restoration projects. What are your thoughts on having this selection mechanism in place, and how that relates to the overall accessibility of making, essentially getting our mission in place faster?
Yeah, I think the selection in the end of what you are going to do, which projects, that's just an incredibly important one, but also a very challenging one. So I can imagine this is not easy for you, and this is something where you will learn over the years. I know that, for example, GiveWell, who rates charities in the health and well-being space, they spend 40,000 hours every year to evaluate charities.
Yeah.
So that's a tremendous amount of hours, which probably you cannot spend yet. So that is something where I think over the years that will gradually develop, and I think the technology and the measurement will also help you in doing that.
Totally.
Because what I see now is, you have a few institutions like GiveWell, Founders Pledge, Giving Green, animal charity evaluators, but they are quite still understaffed. We really need much more data. We really need much more people who see, hey, what are the best ways to do good? And therefore, I'm very happy that now we have new data coming to the table.
Yeah.
So I think from a donor's perspective, one of the most impactful things you can do right now is to help organizations who are trying to build an infrastructure to increase the impact, because you can just create a multiplier. With your money, you can free up other money and other impact.
Indeed, I think part is the due diligence up front, but as you say, we can use the technology not only in the due diligence, but with basically every transaction that happens, we can see what the outcome is and use that as a feedback loop into that due diligence. So it's not just a one-time exercise, which typically it is, right? Okay, then 10 years ago we've looked at it, but now every hour we can look at, is this project delivering, and can they do so more effectively, essentially?
Yeah. And what I understood from you will share that data. And
exactly.
So it will also be open for people to see what is happening, even if it fails.
Yeah.
And again, if it fails, that doesn't mean that a donor should stop giving to that charity.
Yeah.
Right? There should just be an explanation of why it failed and what a charity is going to do differently. I think that's also really important to stress. It shouldn't be a race to the bottom whereby charities are just going to do the low-hanging fruit to just get great numbers, because that is not what we want.
Yeah, yeah.
So that is something that's a challenge.
Yeah, and this is nature we're talking about. And
Yeah.
nature is one of the most wild, literally wild, but also uncontrollable and unpredictable things. So it's definitely, I already know that like within the time that we run this company, this may happen. A disease can break out or a wildfire can break out, and that then kind of undoes some of the work that has been done, which that is not necessarily a failure. It just means that we need to get back to that project and support it even more. Or even if a project has indeed failed to achieve its objectives, then we can find another project that learns from that and then takes it in to make it successful indeed. So yeah.
And are you going to involve scientists also?
Yes, yeah. So that is definitely like in the vision. When we have all this data in one place, then we can engage people around it, right? So these models and this verification and stuff, that doesn't have to be that only we are developing it. So that's also why I'm so happy to have met you, and then together with the UvA, but perhaps even other universities worldwide can start to use this to make to achieve our mission, essentially, to restore more nature than we lose each year. That's essentially it.
Yeah, that's great, because then you get other perspectives, people can challenge you, can deliver new ideas.
Exactly.
Can potentially even use your data for their own research.
Yeah.
And then you create this win-win scenario.
So there's 3 more left. let's run through. This one talks about, okay, on the platform we have these very specific outcomes, right? That relate to a donation, like planting a tree, for example. And then we ask these projects that we work with to define a price for that and essentially kind of break it down. What is that money, the donation, what is it spent on? And then hopefully we can create a sort of comparison that explains why, for example, it's more expensive to plant a tree in the Netherlands as opposed to Brazil, which is a bit of a no-brainer perhaps. But this idea that a platform can also be a marketplace, right? And from an economics perspective, obviously a marketplace can have, multiple actors, and then gradually one kind of true price starts to emerge where that is the cost of good quality restoration. So that's a bit the vision that we have. What can you share about that, looking at it from a system?
As an economist, it's all about pricing.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
If we just priced carbon correctly and destroying the environment, then you wouldn't have a platform.
Yeah, that's true.
Because then companies would have an incentive to fix it. Now, unfortunately, we don't have that, so we do need the platform. And the world doesn't care where a tree is planted. So if we can do it much cheaper in, say, Brazil, we should just do it there. Of course, considering also the risk around it, because in Brazil you have an unstable political climate, but that can just go into the price.
Yeah.
Right? But then once we can start comparing, we can see, hey, where is it cheapest? And let's just do it there.
Moving on, our idea is, hey, if we take this global perspective, right? So we look indeed at the world as one world that we all kind of share, and we allocate the donations that are coming in to the different projects around the globe. We can take into account factors like simple stuff like planting seasons, right? Not every project is active year-round because they have to take into account the local conditions, and it may not be optimal to do that throughout the year. So this idea that a platform can also help to kind of align and make efficient connections between supply and demand. This again may be a very kind of economic way of looking at it in a charity world, but yeah, how do you see? Do you think this is an important role of a platform like ours, or do you say, well, that's actually not something to focus on?
Yeah, I
Curious to
may be
hear.
too much of an economist, but I just see that every space where we can increase efficiency, it is a gain.
Yeah,
Right? And that's also why this World Food Program now delivers 40% more food, because they took away many inefficiencies in this whole delivery chain.
yeah,
Right? And farmers can be helped with apps how to optimize their crops and how to make that in a more sustainable way.
yeah,
And in the same way, that's what your platform can show.
yeah,
And eventually, charities will want to join your platform or another platform, but where they can see, hey, yeah, here I spend 40% less money and I get more results.
yeah. Yeah, has to do, I think, with like the velocity at which we can restore nature, essentially, right? If we get the money to the places where it's most needed in this moment, so to say, like each month you can look at that, right? Where are the projects that need help right now? That if they have more money, they can get to work tomorrow, as opposed to in a year from now, right? So that's also this dynamic that we have with kind of allocating.
Yeah, and that is very good. So I'm an ambassador at the Doneer Effectief as well.
Yeah.
And there also every quarter we see if somebody donates to the health care fund, right? Every quarter, Doneer Effectief sees what is at this moment the very best possibility for
Yeah.
donating that money with the greatest impact. And every quarter that is being reevaluated.
Yeah. Yeah, that's perfect. And I think indeed, especially in a field like ours, right, where there is a sort of seasonality to the whole thing, because literally there are seasons in nature, then that makes sense.
Yeah, and then you can also start optimizing. Like in spring, I am active in Asia. In fall, I'm active in Europe.
Exactly. And it also makes it more interesting for people. Like if there's a variety of things that are happening, then it's, yeah, you keep having this thing that you can share with your audience, whether you're a business or an individual. Last insight that we have is about this core transaction, right? Or that's how we call it in the platform jargon. But like, okay, money goes one way and results go the other way. And this might come back to your earlier point about additionality, but we want to use technology, and in this case particularly AI, to show that each proof that comes to the donators is indeed unique, related to that donation that has been made, and therefore additional, like it would not have happened otherwise. And here we do things like checking whether there's duplicates in the pictures, checking whether there's outliers in the pictures, like things that are accidentally a selfie or whatever, to more advanced stuff like checking whether the weather conditions in the picture match the agreements and the date and time that we know this implementation happened at. So that's a bit of like background to explain what it is that we do. But yeah, what is your perspective on how AI can help out to ensure that these donations actually make their mark?
Yeah, so like I said, it's really important. We saw it even at the biggest carbon offsetter, Vera,
Yeah.
that there were all kind of problems. And not just that the same certificate, CO2 offset certificate, was sold multiple times, but also that there were problems with the comparison group.
Yeah.
Right? So they said, oh yeah, here is the region where we did buy offsetting, here is not, and see, oh, it's better in the region where we offset. Yeah, but in the region where they did not, there was a big highway.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, there's much more
Yeah.
CO2,
Yeah.
right? So even without doing anything, that would be your conclusion, that you do better in this space that is not having a highway than the one that is. So there was curious, like how are you going to ensure that they don't trick you with those type of comparisons, for example? because people are very creative, and particularly if they have money to make.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So indeed, that's where this kind of well, one thing really has to do with we only focus on restoration and not like the avoidance of, because that's a tricky thing with the carbon stuff where it focuses on like the hypothetical avoidance of
exactly, and that is so hard to grasp, right?
Exactly, because the future is uncertain, right? You never know what would have happened, and then particularly when there's a market, in this case for those carbon offsets, where both supply and demand actually want the amount of offer to be very, very large, then you get this inflation of the baselines, for example, where it's way over exaggerated how much CO2 would have been emitted, and that even steps over the core issue, which is that most of these projects aren't grabbing carbon from the atmosphere and storing it somewhere. They're just avoiding that it gets worse.
Which is also important.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, yeah, it has to happen, but it just like the claims that are being made around it may not be factual, and that's not because it may just be because people misunderstand what actually happens on the ground, and that's where we try to make it much more like fact-based. Okay, here X number of trees have been planted, and that you can see, verify, and it's like.
But are you sure that it's then your trees, or could it also be that another charity paid and they present the same picture, say to
Yeah, so well, we have contracts in place with all these parties that say that basically demand this, right? That it's indeed our trees, and that they are not financed by other organizations that are not sold twice. So that is, from one perspective, that's a contractual agreement. We can also look at the exact sites, right? The polygons where these trees are being planted, and look at whether these are being.
The contract already says in this space the trees will be planted.
No. So the contract states per, we call it a batch, so per X number of trees in this case, for example, that we order to be planted, and then our partner shares where they are, right, with the pictures, and then we can use that again to look at, hey, are there other sites that are being sold related to this area, which obviously because we have the contracts in place, typically doesn't happen. And then I think like this is looking ahead, but if our platform gets really, really big and like a de facto standard for making nature impact, then we can also work as like a public ledger, right? Where you can see who's doing what. You can already see that, but that also helps to ensure that there isn't double counting, because there's one book.
You can check for the different charities what is going through your platform.
Exactly.
That will be a great outcome.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping to achieve then together. As you mentioned, like we could talk for hours about this mission, but and we will in the future. There's a lot to do, so we best get back to work to make that impact. But I really want to thank you for your time and for your great insights. I look forward to working together to indeed make the Netherlands the most impactful country in the world.
Thanks for having me, Mike.